Welcome back. This is not just a love story. It's a story about two people who met at the exact wrong time and still couldn't walk away. But every story like this has a moment where everything begins. For them, it looked like this. The gun was already on the table before the man finished speaking. Victor Kwan didn't raise his voice. He never did. He simply placed the weapon between the stack of money and the cold cup of tea, rested 2 fingers on it lightly, the way another man might tap a pen, and looked across the table at the 3 men who had come to his office believing they had leverage over him. They did not have leverage over him. "I'm going to give you until I finish this sentence," Victor said, in the quiet, unhurried tone of a man who had never once needed to repeat himself, "to decide whether you'd like to leave this room with your debt cleared, or whether you'd like to leave this room at all." The money was on the table before he reached the final word. That was Victor Kwan at 43. Half Nigerian, half Korean, and entirely his own creation. His mother had been a seamstress from Lagos who sang Yoruba hymns while she worked and never once raised her hand to him. His father had been the most feared Korean crime lord to ever set foot on West African soil, a man who built an empire with one hand and destroyed anyone who threatened it with the other. Victor had inherited both hands. He ran Port Sora's most powerful criminal network, the Kwan Assembly, from a penthouse that overlooked the entire city like a quiet god watching a world he had already decided the fate of. Korean neon signs reflected off the lagoon below. Afrobeats drifted up from the streets. Street vendors sold suya beside Korean fried chicken stalls. The city was a contradiction that somehow worked, beautiful and dangerous and completely alive. Victor moved through it like a shadow, present everywhere, visible only when he chose to be. His penthouse at night was different from his office. In the office, he was the weapon on the table. At home, he was just a man sitting alone in the dark, staring at a photograph he always turned face down before he slept, as if he could only bear it for so long before something in him cracked under the weight of it. His men had stopped asking about the photograph years ago. Jiho had not. Jiho Kwan was Victor's younger cousin. The kind of person who laughed too loudly and apologized too quickly, and somehow survived every dangerous room he walked into purely because everyone around him was too charmed to cause him harm. He had been following Victor since they were boys, and had spent the better part of 15 years trying to make Victor feel something other than control. He walked into Victor's penthouse on a Tuesday evening with the specific energy of a man who had rehearsed a speech and knew it wasn't good enough. "I need a favor," Jiho said. Victor didn't look up from the documents on his desk. "I set up a dinner, a blind date situation, and I need you to go in my place." Now Victor looked up. "Before you say no," Jiho continued quickly, "her name is Amina. She's a nursing student. She has absolutely nothing to do with our world, no family connections, no agenda, nothing. She's just a person, a normal human person. And I've been talking to her friend for weeks and I panicked and said yes, and now I have an assembly meeting I can't move, and if I cancel on this girl, Saad will never speak to me again and Saad is. Jiho, she's very important to me and I just need you to go, sit down, eat a meal, be a human being for 2 hours. Jiho. And come home. That's all." Silence. Victor studied his cousin for a long moment. 15 years of watching this man walk into his darkness and refuse to be swallowed by it. 15 years of Jiho leaving the light on, metaphorically, in rooms Victor had decided he no longer deserved to occupy. "One dinner," Victor said. Jiho exhaled like a man released from a sentence. "One dinner," he agreed. Then he was out of the door before Victor could change his mind. What neither of them noticed, what the camera in the corner of Victor's lobby captured, but no one ever reviewed, was Jiho pausing in the corridor outside, taking out a second phone, dialing a number that wasn't saved under any name, and saying, in a voice stripped of all its usual warmth, "It's done." He agreed. The restaurant was called Port Sora Grand, and it sat at the intersection of the city's 2 souls. Korean paper lanterns hung from a ceiling painted in deep ochre print patterns. The menu was written in 3 languages. The wine list featured palm wine aged in cedarwood beside imported Korean makgeolli. It was the kind of place that reminded you that beauty was always possible when 2 things that seemed opposite decided to stop fighting and simply exist together. Amina arrived at 7:58. She wore a deep green wrap dress that moved when she walked like it was part of her, natural hair pinned up with 2 gold pins, a single bracelet on her right wrist. She paused at the entrance and scanned the room, not the way a nervous woman scans for her date, but the way someone scans a space they've studied in advance. Calm, methodical, deliberate, behind eyes that smiled warmly at the host. Victor was already seated. He saw her the moment she stepped through the door, and something in him, something that had been sealed shut for years, something he had convinced himself no longer worked, responded before his mind could stop it. He stood. She crossed the room. Their eyes held the whole way. "Amina," she said, extending her hand. "Victor," he replied. And then, because she had looked at him with the kind of directness that made small talk feel like an insult, "You already knew what I looked like." She tilted her head. The smallest smile. "Jiho showed me a photo. Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "It just means I'm at a disadvantage. You don't seem like a man who accepts disadvantages." "I don't," he said. "Which means I'll spend the rest of this dinner catching up." She sat down. Something moved across her face, approval or recognition, or something she immediately filed away behind composure. The conversation began the way good conversations always do. Carefully, and then suddenly without any care at all. She talked about the hospital ward she worked in, the way the system failed patients who had no money and no connections, the particular exhaustion of caring deeply about people in a city that had been structured not to care about them. He pushed back on something she said about the healthcare budget. She corrected him with specific figures. He went quiet in the way people go quiet when they realize they've underestimated someone. And then he leaned forward slightly, and the dinner changed. They argued about the city. They agreed about the city. She stole a piece of his food without asking, and he looked at the empty fork like he was deciding whether to be amused or offended and landed on amused. He told her something about his childhood. Not much, nothing dangerous, just a sliver. And she listened with the full weight of her attention in a way that made the sliver feel like the most important thing he had said in years. He made her laugh. Twice. She made him laugh. Once, but it was real, and they both noticed. At the end of the night, they walked out into Port Sora together. The city was loud and luminous around them. He didn't want to leave. She could see that he didn't want to leave, and she watched him try to find a reason to stay without saying it directly. And she let him struggle with it for exactly long enough before she rescued him. Same time next week, she said. He agreed immediately, and then looked faintly surprised at himself. She walked to her car. He watched until she was out of sight. The second her door closed, Amina's hands found the steering wheel and gripped it hard. Her breathing changed. The warmth in her face didn't disappear, it complicated. It became something more painful, more tangled. She closed her eyes. He's exactly what I was told he would be, she whispered in Yoruba, to no one but herself. This is going to be so much harder than I planned. She sat in the dark for a moment. Then she started the car and drove. Behind her, through the restaurant window, Victor sat back down at the empty table. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at nothing for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called his second-in-command. Hyunsuk, he said. I need a full background check. Her name is Amina Ease. Nursing student. Port Sora University Hospital. Full depth. Everything. He hung up, stared at the city through the glass. For the first time in longer than he could name, he was thinking about a person instead of a problem. He didn't know yet that she was both. If you're already hooked, and I know you are, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this story is only getting started, and you will not want to miss what comes next. The folder landed on Victor's desk 3 days later. Hyunsuk placed it without ceremony, without expression, and stepped back. He had the specific stillness of a man who had delivered bad news so many times that bad news had stopped registering on his face. But his eyes always told a different story. Victor opened it. The first page was biographical. Standard. Amina Ajinola Ease, 26, born in Port Sora General Hospital. Adopted at 11 days old by Emmanuel and Yemisi Ease, a civil servant and a schoolteacher. Raised in the Atakunal district. Academic scholarships from secondary school through university. Final year nursing student. No criminal record. No known associations with organized networks. Clean. Completely clean. Victor turned the page. And stopped. The second page was a genealogical report. DNA-adjacent intel, sourced from sealed adoption records that Hyunsuk had accessed through channels that did not officially exist. And at the bottom of the second page, underlined once in red ink, was a name. Biological father, General Emeka Okafor. The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Victor read the name again. Not because he hadn't understood it the first time, but because some information requires a second reading just to convince your body that your eyes are not lying to you. Emeka Okafor, 61 years old. Founder and patriarch of the Okafor Syndicate, the one criminal organization in Port Sora that had ever looked the Kwan Assembly in the eye and refused to blink. 15 years of Cold War between two empires. Territory disputes that had cost lives on both sides. An enmity so old and so layered that neither man could fully remember anymore which wound came first. Okafor was not simply Victor's enemy. He was the wall Victor had spent 15 years trying to tear down. And the woman Victor had laughed with 3 nights ago, the woman whose voice he had been hearing in the back of his mind every morning since, was that man's blood. Victor. Hyunsuk spoke carefully. This is either the most dangerous coincidence in the history of this city, or it is a setup so precise that it took someone months to build. Victor closed the folder. Does she know who her father is? He asked. Our sources indicate she has no knowledge of her biological parentage. The adoption was sealed. No contact, no record, nothing accessible through normal channels. Victor was quiet for a long time. Outside, Port Sora moved and breathed and hummed indifferent. Nobody touches her, Victor said. Victor. She didn't choose her bloodline. She doesn't know. Nobody touches her, nobody approaches her, nobody breathes near her without my knowledge. He stood, walked to the window. And we say nothing. To her. To anyone. We continue as normal and we watch. Hyunsuk was quiet for precisely long enough to communicate that he disagreed. As you say, he replied. And left. Victor stayed at the window. Below, the city lived its double life, beautiful above and dangerous below, the way it always had. He thought about the way Amina had looked at him across that table. The way she had argued with him and stolen his food and laughed with her entire face. He thought about the photograph he turned face down every night. And he thought about the fact that in 15 years of running the Kwan Assembly, he had never once let his heart make a decision. He stood there for a very long time. Then he picked up his phone and confirmed their second date. The rooftop was his, one of 6 properties in the city that existed under names that couldn't be traced back to him. He had it arranged differently for that evening. Low lights. A small table. Food from a place in the Apapa district that made jollof rice the way his mother used to describe wanting it. A speaker somewhere playing Afrobeats low enough to be felt rather than heard. When Amina stepped out of the elevator and saw it, she paused. Something moved through her eyes, not surprise exactly. Something more like a decision being reinforced. You didn't have to do all this, she said. I know, Victor replied. Sit down. It was easier this time, the way the second time is always easier. The nervousness replaced by something more comfortable and therefore more dangerous. They talked for 2 hours without noticing the time passing. She told him about a patient she had lost that week. A young boy whose parents hadn't been able to afford the procedure that would have saved him. And the way she said it, quietly, without drama, but with the full grief of someone who refused to become numb to the cost of a broken system, made Victor look at her for a long time without speaking. You carry it, he said. Most people learn to put it down. Putting it down means pretending it doesn't weigh anything, she replied. I'd rather carry it and let it mean something. He said nothing, but he heard it in a place far deeper than response. She asked about his family. He gave her the version of the truth he gave everyone: Korean father, Nigerian mother, built his business from the city up. She listened in the particular way she had that made him feel both seen and exposed, and asked him questions that were just sharp enough to remind him she was not fooled by the edited version. He gave her slightly more. Not much, but more than he had given anyone in years. Then she asked, do you ever think about how your story would have gone if one thing had changed? One person, one moment, just slightly different. He looked at her. Every day, he said. She held his gaze for a moment too long to be casual. Then she reached across the table and took the last piece of food from his plate. Again. And the moment broke open into something lighter, and they both let it. He watched her leave again that night. And again, that thing in his chest that he had spent years keeping quiet refused to cooperate. He was falling. He could feel the exact shape of it, and he could not stop it, and for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to. What Victor did not know was that 3 floors below that rooftop, parked on the street in a black car with no plates, 2 men sat watching the building. They had not been sent by Okafor. They had been sent by Hyunsuk. Hyunsuk, who had decided, in that careful, cold way of his, that Victor's feelings were a liability the assembly could not afford. That the Okafor girl, knowingly or not, was a thread that could unravel everything. That someone had to make the decision Victor was too compromised to make himself. He had not ordered violence. Not yet. He was smarter than that. He wanted her to leave on her own, afraid, confused, unsure of why the air around her had changed. He wanted her gone in a way that left Victor with no one to be angry at. The men watched the building until the lights went out. Then they drove away. The note was on her windshield the next morning. She found it at 6:45 a.m., on her way to an early hospital shift. Plain white paper folded once. 7 words written in block letters. Some doors were not meant for you. Amina stood beside her car in the gray Port Sora morning. She read the note once. Twice. Then she folded it along its original crease, placed it in the inner pocket of her bag, and got in the car. She sat for 10 seconds. Precisely 10 seconds. Then she took out a phone, not the phone she used to call Saad, not the phone she used to call her mother, and dialed. The call connected on the second ring. They left a note, she said. Someone in his inner circle. Not him, he wouldn't do it this way. Someone moving without his instruction. A pause while the other person spoke. I know, but I'm not stopping. We're too close. The second date went exactly as I needed it to. He's starting to let me in. Another pause. Longer this time. I said I'll handle it. She hung up. Started the car. Drove to work like the morning was completely ordinary. On her ward that day, she was exactly who she always was, precise, warm, fully present with every patient. No one who looked at her would have seen anything different. But something had shifted. Because the note was not a surprise. The note was a confirmation. And confirmations, depending on what they confirmed, could be more frightening than surprises. Because Amina had been waiting for someone in Victor's circle to notice her. She had expected it. She had planned around it. What she had not planned, what no calculation had prepared her for, was the way Victor Kwan looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The way something in his face went very still and very open at the same time, like a man standing at the edge of something vast, unable to decide whether to step back or let himself fall. She had come into this with a plan. A clear, cold, necessary plan. She was terrified of what his eyes were doing to it. Victor found out about the note on a Thursday. It came from an unlikely source, the overnight security attendant at Amina's building, a quiet man named Chukwu who had worked that post for 11 years and whose sister Victor had once helped out of a debt that would have destroyed her family. Chukwu owed nothing formally. But loyalty, Victor had long understood, was never really about formal arrangements. Chukwu placed a brief call to one of Victor's men, described 2 individuals, a vehicle, and a piece of paper left on a windshield at 4:40 in the morning. By the time Victor had cross-referenced the vehicle description with the Assembly's own surveillance network, he already knew the answer. He summoned Hyunsuk. The office was quiet when Hyunsuk arrived. Victor was seated behind his desk, perfectly still, his hands folded in front of him. There was no weapon on the table this time. There didn't need to be. The temperature of the room was cold enough without it. Was it you? Victor said, not asked, said. Or did you delegate it? Hyunsuk met his gaze without flinching. That was the thing about Hyunsuk. He never flinched. He was built, at his core, from the belief that he was always right, and that belief made him very brave and very dangerous, and on this particular morning, very wrong. I did what the assembly required, Hyunsuk said. I didn't ask for your reasoning. You're compromised, Victor. Hyunsuk's voice stayed even. Controlled. You're 3 weeks into a situation with a woman whose bloodline is the most destabilizing variable this organization has encountered in 15 years. You're not thinking clearly. Someone had to. Someone, Victor said softly, had to go behind my back and put a threatening note on the car of a civilian woman who has done nothing to this organization. Someone decided that was a reasonable decision to make. Someone decided that your feelings were going to get people killed. The silence stretched. When Victor spoke again, his voice was so quiet that Hyunsuk had to resist the urge to step forward to hear it clearly. If you go near her again, Victor said, every year of history between us, every weight you carry in this organization, every debt I've excused and every decision I've backed, all of it ends. I will dismantle your position in this assembly brick by brick, and I will do it publicly, and you will have nothing left but the memory of the day you decided your judgment was worth more than your loyalty to me. He unfolded his hands. Are we clear? Hyunsuk's jaw worked once. She has Okafor's eyes, he said. I see it every time you show me a photo of her. Every time you look at her, Victor, whether you know it or not, you're looking at him. I don't understand how you can want that. Because she is not him. Victor stood. She never chose her blood, Hyunsuk. Neither did I. Hyunsuk left. At the door, he paused, just for a moment, shoulders tight, back still, and then walked out without another word. Victor sat back down. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose and stayed very still for a long time. Hyunsuk was not wrong about everything. That was the specific torture of it. The man was wrong about his methods and wrong about his boundaries, but the fear underneath his actions. That Victor was losing objectivity, that the situation was accelerating beyond control. That fear had a heartbeat. Because Victor had looked at that folder every night for a week. He had stared at Amina's name beside Okafor's name, and he had told himself to be careful, to be strategic, to treat this the way he treated everything. As a variable, as a risk, as a piece in a larger game. And then she would say something, or look at him a specific way, or reach across a table and take his food without asking, and every piece of him that was trained to stay cold and untouched would simply refuse. He was not losing his mind. He was losing something else. Something older. He was losing the argument he had been having with himself since the night his wife died, the argument that went, you do not get to have this anymore. You do not get to want this. You gave up the right to softness the night you couldn't protect the one person who deserved your protection most. He had been winning that argument for 3 years. Amina Ease was making it very, very difficult to keep winning. She found out about her mother on a Saturday. Not from a file, not from a stranger, not from any of the careful research she had spent 2 years quietly conducting. She found out from her mother herself, in the kitchen of the house she had grown up in, over a pot of egusi soup and an afternoon that had started as an ordinary visit and ended as anything but. She had been watching her mother carefully for years, with a love that had never once been complicated by the truth she had discovered and carried alone. The birth documents she had found in a locked drawer at 24, searching for her university insurance papers, of all things, had not shaken her love for Yemi Ease. If anything, the secret had deepened her tenderness for the woman who had never given her a single day's reason to feel anything other than fully wanted. But something was different that Saturday. Her mother kept looking at her from the corner of her eye, kept opening her mouth and stopping, kept stirring a pot that didn't need stirring. Amina put down her cup. Mummy, she said gently, you can tell me. Yemi stopped stirring. Her hands tightened on the spoon. And then, slowly, she set it down and turned. And in her face was the exact weight of a woman who had carried something for 26 years and had finally run out of the strength to carry it alone. I've been wanting to tell you since you were 18, she said. Your father, Emmanuel, God rest his soul, he said wait. He said you were too young. Then he said wait longer. Then he was gone, and I was the one holding it, and every year I told myself, maybe next year. Maybe when she's more settled. Maybe when she's stronger. Mummy. Amina's voice was soft. I know about Okafor. Yemi went absolutely still. I found the birth record 2 years ago, Amina said. I've known. I didn't say anything because I didn't want you to carry the guilt of telling me on top of everything else you were already carrying. Her mother's eyes filled. Slowly, the way a dam fills, not suddenly, but with the quiet accumulation of too much. There's a letter, Yemi whispered. From your biological mother. She left it with the adoption records. She asked that we give it to you when you were old enough. Her voice broke slightly on the next part. I've been afraid of what it says. She retrieved it from the back of the drawer where she kept Emmanuel's Bible. A sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. Amina's name written on the front in careful, educated handwriting. Amina held it for a moment, then opened it. She read in silence. A full minute. 2. Her mother watched her face the way parents watch their children in emergency rooms. Desperate for a sign, terrified of every small movement. When Amina looked up, there was something in her eyes that Yemi had never seen there before. Not grief. Not rage. Something older and quieter than either. Something that looked almost like a road becoming clear. She knew someone, Amina said carefully. She wrote about a family. A man she said had the capacity for something better than the life he was living. She said she tried to reach him. But she ran out of time. Yemi nodded carefully, not fully understanding. I have to go, Mummy. Amina stood, folded the letter, held it against her chest for one moment before placing it in her bag. She kissed her mother's forehead. Long and gentle. You did nothing wrong, she said. You gave me everything. Everything that mattered. She walked to her car. She sat in it for a while. In the cooling Port Sora afternoon, with the letter in her lap and the weight of 26 years redistributing itself across her shoulders into something she could carry differently. Something she could carry forward. Her biological mother had known Victor's father. The letter didn't say it plainly. It spoke around it in the careful language of a woman who knew that letters sometimes landed in the wrong hands. But Amina had spent 2 years learning to read the language of things unsaid, and what the letter said, between its careful lines, was this. These two families were always supposed to find each other. I tried. I failed. I'm leaving you the door. Amina's plan had begun with research, with cold analysis, with the calculated decision to use the one thing she had, the truth of her own identity, to walk into the most dangerous intersection in Port Sora's underworld and make 2 men see what she could see clearly from the outside. But sitting in that car, with her mother's kitchen light on behind her and her biological mother's handwriting in her lap, Amina allowed herself, for the first time, to feel the full, terrifying, inconvenient weight of what was actually happening. She was falling in love with Victor Kwan, and she had absolutely no idea what to do with that. Batch 4. The encrypted message arrived on a device only 11 people in the world knew existed. Victor read it once. Then he read it again. Then he set the phone face down on his desk the way he set that photograph face down every night, and he sat there in his office in the white noise of the city, trying to locate something inside himself that resembled equilibrium. The message said, "She's beautiful, isn't she? She gets that from her mother." Yo! He called Jiho within 2 minutes. His cousin arrived within 20, and Victor knew, from the way Jiho walked in, from the specific quality of the guilt already arranged on his face before a single word was said, that Jiho already knew why he had been called. Sit down, Victor said. Jiho sat. Tell me who gave you her name. Jiho closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them, and did the thing he had always done when cornered by Victor. He told the truth, because he had learned young that the only thing worse than Victor knowing the truth was Victor finding it out another way. A man approached me about 3 months ago, Jiho said. At the Port Sora Cultural Exchange dinner, the Korean business community won. He found me at the bar. Said he was a matchmaker. High-end. That he had a client, a young woman, exceptional, that he was looking for a suitable match for. He'd done background on our family. Jiho's voice was tightening with every sentence. He paid me. I didn't ask enough questions. I thought, Victor hasn't dated anyone in 3 years. He's closed off in a way that's going to hollow him out if it continues. And this woman, her photos, the file the man gave me, she seemed real. She seemed good. I thought I was helping. The man, Victor said. Did he give you a name? A business card. It was fake. I checked it last week when I started getting a bad feeling. The company doesn't exist. Victor stood up. Get out, Jiho. Victor. Get out. Jiho stood slowly. At the door, he turned. And despite everything, despite the particular brand of fear that Victor generated when he went this quiet, Jiho's face held something stubborn. I've made mistakes with this, Jiho said. I know that. I should have investigated. I was careless. But Victor, whatever the circumstances are, whatever is happening around her, that woman looked at you across that table the way no one has looked at you since. Jiho. Jiho stopped. I know what you're going to say, Victor said, very quietly. Don't. Jiho left. The penthouse was silent. Victor stayed at his window for a long time. Port Sora glittered below him. All that beauty, all that danger, all that noise. Okafor had orchestrated this. Okafor had placed Amina in his path like a move on a board that Victor hadn't even known he was playing. The setup, the matchmaker, Jiho. All of it leading to one dinner, one table, one woman who looked at him like she wasn't afraid of anything he was. The question that was killing him. The question he paced his office with at 2 in the morning. The question that had no clean answer. was the same one he kept returning to no matter which direction he approached it from. Did she know? Did Amina know who she was, who he was, who her father was? Had all of that warmth, all of that laughter, all of those evenings been a performance? He couldn't make it add up. He had read people his entire life. It was the skill that had kept him alive longer than skill with weapons or numbers or strategy. And everything in him that was trained to detect performance said, she is real. What you felt across that table was real. What she showed you on that rooftop was real. But that same instinct also said, there is something she isn't telling you. There is a layer she has not shown. Both things could be true. He knew that. He had been both things himself for years. He arranged the meeting with Okafor through a channel so oblique it would have taken anyone outside their two organizations a year to trace. Neutral ground, a private room above the Port Sora Cultural Hall, a building that functioned as the city's unofficial treaty ground, the only place both men had ever agreed, in 15 years, to share air. Okafor arrived with 2 men and left them at the door. Victor arrived alone. They sat across from each other for a moment in a silence that contained 15 years of damage. Territories taken, men lost, money burned on both sides of an enmity that had started over a shipping contract dispute that neither of them had even started. Okafor looked older than the last time Victor had seen him. Something in the set of his jaw, something around his eyes. He looked like a man who had been carrying a weight specifically calibrated to exceed his strength. You set up the date, Victor said. I opened a door, Okafor replied. She built the whole plan herself. I want you to understand that. I did not put her in your path. She found me and told me what she intended, and I gave her access to Jiho because she asked and because I have learned at great personal cost to stop underestimating her. He paused. She is her mother's daughter. Her mother. Victor's voice was careful. Tell me. Okafor was quiet for a moment. She was a woman I did not deserve, he said finally. She saw something in me that I consistently failed to live up to. She wanted to leave this world, not leave me, leave the world we were in, the violence of it. I kept promising that was coming, that I was almost out. She ran out of time waiting. His voice remained steady, but something behind it was not. She died when Amina was 11 days old. Complications from the birth. I had the child placed with a family I trusted because I could not raise a daughter in the world I was living in and justify what I was doing to it. Victor said nothing. I have watched her from a distance for 26 years, Okafor continued. She is extraordinary. Not because of my blood, despite it, perhaps. She wants to end this war, Victor. She has wanted it since she was old enough to understand what the war was. She's a civilian. She stopped being purely a civilian the day she walked into my office alone, sat down across from me, and said, I know who you are and I know who my father is, and I know what this city costs. Tell me what it will take to stop it. Okafor met Victor's eyes. She's 26. I've been having that conversation with heads of government, and she came closer to making me believe it was possible than any of them. Victor sat with that. You're dying, Victor said. It wasn't a question. Something about the older man's stillness, the particular quality of his unhurriedness, had told him since he sat down. Okafor nodded once. Liver. 6 months, they say. I have perhaps less. He paused. I have spent 15 years trying to defeat you, Victor. I have spent 30 years building something I cannot justify. I would like, before I am finished, to see my daughter safe. Not as a piece in a game. Not as leverage. Just safe. And perhaps, if the city permits it, happy. The silence that followed was unlike any silence Victor had sat inside before. It was full of things, all the years, all the damage, all the men on both sides who had paid prices for the decisions of 2 men who sat across from each other now looking, for the first time, less like enemies and more like 2 people who were very, very tired. I'm not making any agreements tonight, Victor said. I'm not asking for any, Okafor replied. Victor stood, looked at the older man for a long moment. She has your jaw, he said. Not your eyes. Your jaw. Okafor looked at him, and something almost moved in his face. Victor left. He did not know that while he sat across from Okafor, Hyun-suk was making a call. Not to Okafor's people. Not to anyone Victor knew or could have predicted. Hyun-suk had found a third party, a foreign cartel that had been probing Port Sora's power structure for 8 months, looking for a fault line, a fracture point, a way in. And Hyun-suk, who had decided that Victor's compromise was going to destroy the assembly before Okafor could, had given them one. He had given them Amina. Not to harm her. He told himself this carefully, because it mattered to him to believe it. Just to remove her. To make her a liability so visible, so untenable, that Victor would have no choice but to let go. To end the situation the way it should have been ended 3 weeks ago, before feelings became architecture. He sent her name and address and a daily schedule to a number that connected to no person and no country. He told himself it was for the assembly. He told himself it was for Victor. He did not fully examine whether it was also, in some deep and unconfessed chamber of himself, for the 3 years he had spent holding the organization together while Victor grieved. For the invisible loyalty that had never been named, never been enough, and had now been superseded by a woman who had known Victor for less than a month. He told himself none of that. He made the call. And then he went home. It was Victor's loyalty network that saved her. Not Hyun-suk's trap springing too early. Not Amina's own awareness, though she had it. It was Chukwu, again quietly, the same man who had told Victor about the first note. who spotted the 3 cars converging on Amina's building from different directions at 11 at night and recognized the particular geometry of it as something that was not coincidental. He made the call. Victor's phone rang as he was driving home from the meeting with Okafor. He listened to Chukwu's description, processed it in the 3 seconds it took a man of his experience to understand what was happening, and redirected every available person in his network to Amina's building without wasting a single word. He called Amina. She picked up on the second ring. "Don't open your door," he said. "I know." Her voice was calm. The specific calm of someone who has been watching out of a darkened window and has already assessed the situation from multiple angles. "A beat. How do you know?" Victor asked. "Because I saw the cars park," she said. "Because one of them circled the block before stopping, which means they were mapping exits. And because I've been expecting something like this since Hyun-suk left that note on my windshield last week." The silence on the line was very short and very loud. "You knew about the note," Victor said. "I kept it," she replied. "I have it in my bag." Another silence. "Stay away from the windows," he said. "I'm 4 minutes out." It was over in less than that, once his people arrived. The foreign operatives had not been expecting a coordinated response. They had been expecting an unprotected target and a clean exit. What they got instead was the full, quiet efficiency of the Kwan assembly operating on its home ground. No shots fired. No deaths. A message sent in the language that organizations like theirs understood. "You are outmatched here. Withdraw." They withdrew. Victor found Amina inside her apartment, standing in the center of the room with her arms crossed and her chin level. Her breathing was controlled. Her eyes, when they found his, were not the eyes of a woman who had just survived a threat. They were the eyes of a woman who had arrived at a moment she had been walking toward for a long time. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No. Amina. I'm fine, Victor." He crossed the room and stood close to her and looked at her the way he had been trying not to look at her for weeks. All the way, without the guard, without the calculation. Just looked at her. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About who your biological father is." "Emeka Okafor," she said. "General. 61 years old. 6 months, maybe less, to live. Founder of the organization that has been at war with yours for 15 years. Currently trying to engineer a peace he should have built a decade ago." She paused. "Your turn." He stared at her. Something in his expression, that beautiful, unguarded something that appeared so rarely, cracked fully open. "How long?" he asked. "I found the birth record 2 years ago. I found Okafor 8 months ago. I planned the approach to Jiho 6 months ago." She held his gaze. "I came into this with an objective. A real one. This city has been paying the price of a war between 2 families for 15 years, and the people paying it are people like my patients. People with no connection to either of your worlds who just need the city to function without being swallowed by it. I thought, if I could get to both sides, if I could be the person who stood in the intersection and made you both see it." "You engineered all of it," Victor said. "Not accusing. Just absorbing." "Yes. The meetings. The things you said. The way you made me." He stopped. "I planned the strategy," she said. "I did not plan what happened to me. And I want you to know that those are 2 completely separate things, and I understand if you can't separate them, and I am not asking you to." "Amina." She stopped. "When did you stop being able to separate them?" he asked. She looked at him. And for the first time in all the weeks of their careful, layered, beautiful, and dangerous knowing of each other, Amina Ease let every single piece of her composure go. "The second date," she said, and her voice was different now, smaller, more real, the voice she didn't use in any plan. "You told me something about your mother. Just a small thing. And the way you said it, like you were handing me something fragile that you hadn't let yourself touch in years." She stopped. Her eyes were bright. "I went home and I sat in my car for 40 minutes because I couldn't figure out what to do with the fact that I was falling for the exact person I had come to be strategically close to, and every scenario I had built assumed I would stay in control of myself. This plan for 8 months, she said. I have been in control of every variable. And then you sat across from me at a table and looked at me like I was the only clear thing in a room full of noise, and I lost the thread. I have been losing it ever since." He reached out. His hand found hers. He held it the way you hold something you've been afraid of losing before you even had it. "My second in command tried to have you scared away," he said. "When that didn't work, he gave your location to a foreign cartel. I didn't know about the second part until tonight. What are you going to do about him? Remove him from the assembly. Not eliminate him. Remove him." His thumb moved over her hand. He was wrong about everything except one thing. He said I was compromised. He was right. I've been compromised since the first night. Silence. The city outside carried on, enormous and indifferent, and full of people who had no idea that something was being decided in this room that might eventually change the shape of all their lives. "What happens now?" Amina asked. "Now I find out who tipped Hyun-suk to that cartel, and I close that door permanently," Victor said. "And then I go back to Okafor and I have the conversation I should have had 7 years ago. Not because he asked me to. Because the cost of not having it has been this city." She looked at him. "And us." He looked at her for a long time. Everything he had locked away, the photograph on the nightstand, the 3 years of controlled grief, the slow accumulation of evenings on rooftops with this woman who had walked into his world carrying a plan and accidentally carried herself too. All of it was present in the space between them. You came to me with a plan, he said slowly. And the plan was to end a war. And somewhere inside that plan, without either of us managing to stop it, something real happened. He paused. I don't know how to do this. I have not known how to do this in a long time. Neither do I, she said. I've been running the strategy so long I forgot to build anything for after. Then we build it now, he said. Together. Badly, probably for a while. But together. She exhaled and leaned her forehead against his shoulder. And he put his arms around her, in the middle of her Port Sora apartment, with the city still moving outside and the mess of everything still entirely unresolved. And he held on. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing in Port Sora ever was. Hyun-suk was removed from the assembly. Not quietly, publicly, in front of the full inner circle, with the reason stated plainly and without cruelty. The men who had served under him shifted their allegiance within 48 hours. Loyalty, in Victor's world, did not follow sentiment. It followed strength, and Victor had made clear where the strength lived. The foreign cartel received a communication, through channels they could not trace, that conveyed in precise and unmistakable terms that Port Sora was not a market they would be permitted to enter. They did not respond. They did not return. Amina met Okafor for the second time in a private room that Victor arranged, and then chose not to attend. Not because he was afraid of what would happen, but because he understood, with a clarity that had taken him weeks to arrive at, that this meeting was not his. It belonged to a father and a daughter who had 26 years of distance to begin dismantling, and some distances required privacy to cross. She came out of that meeting after 2 hours. Victor was waiting in the corridor. She stood in front of him, and he watched her face, where grief and resolution and something he could only call grace were moving together in the particular way that people's faces move when they have been through something they will spend years understanding. He cried, she said softly, as if this were the most extraordinary thing. I've read everything about him. The files, the history, the things he's done. And he just cried, like a man and not a general. Victor said nothing. He said my mother sent him a letter before she died, Amina continued. She left him instructions. She told him, if the day ever came when he was ready to put it down, to find the Kwan assembly and sit at a table and start speaking. She said the only thing this city needs is for 2 stubborn men to decide to stop. She paused. She'd been trying to tell him for years. Victor looked at her. My father, he said slowly, and your mother. They knew each other, Amina said. I think they tried to build something. I think the war started, in part, because what they were building got caught in the middle of what both families wanted to protect. She met his eyes. We have been given the same problem they couldn't solve. And we have something they didn't. What's that? Victor asked. Each other, she said. On the same side. He reached for her hand. 3 months later, Port Sora held its first joint cultural summit between the Korean business community and the Yoruba trade associations. Officially neutral, officially a cultural event. Very obviously something more. Victor sat at one end of a long table. Okafor's representative sat at the other. In between them, the city's people talked about infrastructure and healthcare and the port expansion and all the ordinary, vital things that cities need to survive. Amina was not at the table. She was in the hospital, on a morning shift, doing the work she had always done, carrying the weight of it, letting it mean something. Victor texted her once. It's starting. She replied once. I know. I'll be watching. That evening, they stood on his rooftop again. The same city. The same lights. Everything different. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He rested his chin on her hair. My mother's letter, Amina said quietly. At the very end of it, she wrote something that I keep thinking about. What did she write? Amina was quiet for a moment. She said, I'm leaving you the door. But doors only mean something if the right people walk through them. Find someone who carries weight for others before themselves. That kind of person can build something that lasts. Victor looked at his hands resting on the rooftop railing. The left side, calloused in the specific way of a man who had always been the one others leaned on. Long before he had any power, when he was just a boy holding his mother's hand in a city that was too large and too loud and too much. He turned his hands over. Looked at them. She knew your father, Amina said softly. She left you a message. 26 years ago. Through me. Victor did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was very quiet. We were always going to find each other, he said. Yes, she replied. We just took the long way. The city breathed below them. Port Sora in all its impossible, contradictory, surviving beauty. Korean lanterns reflecting off the lagoon. Afrobeats rising from the streets like something that refused to be quiet. 2 worlds that had decided, a long time ago, to stop being opposites and simply exist together. It was not a perfect city. It was not a safe one. The peace that was beginning was fragile and young and would require more work than either of them fully knew yet. But it was beginning. And sometimes a beginning is the whole world. The end. And that, right there, is where we leave Victor and Amina. If this story did something to you, if you felt it somewhere real, then you already know what to do. Drop a comment below and tell me the moment that hit you hardest. Was it Amina in the car after the first date, realizing her plan was falling apart? Was it Victor reading that folder and choosing her anyway? Was it Okafor crying in that room? I want to know. Every comment gets read. If you're new here and this is your first time, welcome. This is what we do. Stories that don't let go. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. And if you haven't liked this video yet, now is the time. It takes 1 second and it means everything. Until next time, Port Sora, and all the cities like it, belong to the people brave enough to build something new. See you in the next story.